Join us for Book Beat, Sundays at 5 p.m., repeated Monday at 1 a.m. and 9 a.m. on Channel 19.
I have loved books since I was a little tiny child. I've had authors on the show that have written mysteries,
Periodically, Vaughn comes back into Leonard's life.
memoir,
As growing up as children, our jobs is to master those stories.
self-help.
That holds you back from living your life and from being authentic and true and happy and finding the joy that you deserve.
People should watch my show because I have interesting guests.
It's not about being afraid. It's about pushing past your fear.
The author gets an hour of time to talk about his or her work. The other thing that I do a couple of times a year is I do a book review show, usually of children's books. It gives parents a good idea of what kind of books are out there to gift their children with for the holidays. When I woke up in the morning, I saw Santa had come after all. You can see Book Beat on Channel 19, Sundays at 5 p.m., repeated Monday at 1 a.m. and 9 a.m. That's in HD. You can also see my show on YouTube at BookBeat 26, and that's all lowercase. Hello and welcome to Book Beat. My name is Sue Ellen Zagrabelny, and today we have as our guest Brian Lutterman, who is the author of Windfall. Brian, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Well, I am thrilled that you've come to spend time with us today. Could you give the readers and our audience a flavor of Windfall?
Windfall is a pretty intense mystery thriller for fans of writers like David Baldacci, Harlan Coben, Jonathan Kellerman. It's the kind of book that you're going to enjoy.
Can you tell us anything about the plot without giving away the...
I'll try to avoid the spoilers.
Yes.
Windfall, my character, Penn Wilkinson, who is a young attorney, who is a prosecutor, becomes involved with a couple of different problems. One is that her key witness for an upcoming trial vanishes. This is her first big trial, her first big opportunity, and just before the trial, witness disappears. And second, she is involved in the murder of someone she knows, and her boyfriend, significant other, James, is accused of that murder, and ultimately Penn herself becomes under suspicion for that murder. So you've got these two significant problems that she faces in Windfall.
Yes. I found it a real page-turner. It was very enjoyable on the one hand and very suspenseful that you were waiting to find out what the next shoe to fall was. Your reputation is as a mystery writer, suspense writer. Tell our audience how you came to work in that genre.
Well, I've always been a fan of the genre, of reading that type of work, and going back to the 1970s. I think some of you may remember Thomas Gifford, who was a Minnesota writer, one of the early authors, I think, in this modern writers in this type of genre. And he wrote a book called The Wind Chill Factor. I became a fan of his and a fan of the genre. Mm-hmm. And over the years, I've been a fan as a reader. Now, as a writer, I used to practice law once upon a time, and I had to give that up for health reasons. And when I gave that up, I found that what I missed most about the job was writing. Now, writing business and legal memoranda, that type of thing is what I had done before, and I didn't have that opportunity any longer, so I thought, well, what about fiction? I enjoy mysteries and thrillers, maybe I'll give that a try. And so it took a while to really develop my skills on that, but that's how I got started on it, and I've quickly learned this was the sweet spot for me. This is what I love to do. It was the right thing and for me, and I can't imagine not doing it.
How long have you been practicing writing as is it your profession? Is it an avocation?
Well, profession, I think, means you make a living off of it, which I can't say that I do that. I'd say it's a strong avocation. And I have been doing that since the 90s. And my first book was released in 2002. And then my second one 2 years later. And then ran into some more health problems. It was another 10 years before I was able to do another book, and that was in 2014, and when I began the Penn Wilkinson series.
And so then Windfall came out in 2015, was that
Right. The fall of 2015, that's correct.
Okay. You touched a little bit on your background. That could you talk a little bit more about how you were inspired to write these kinds of novels?
Right. Well, I found that I was good with words, and I found that I was also good, I think, in terms of plotting things logically and organizing, keeping track of what goes on. I'll draw charts just like I did in preparing for trials when I was an attorney, and with the lists of the characters or witnesses when I was practicing law, and I just found that came naturally to me. But I also found that it wasn't just the familiar things that I was good at doing that inspired me to write this type of book, but it was the opportunity to stretch a little bit, to get into some things that I wasn't so familiar with. I didn't know anybody who was in a wheelchair, as my character Penn is, and I write these books from the viewpoint of from a female viewpoint. I have a woman who's a lead character. That has been a stretch for me. So it's been an opportunity to stretch out a little bit, grow a little bit, as well as to develop the skills that I already had.
Did you start doing this kind of organically, or did you take classes? How did you break into the work?
I did take a couple of classes back in the 90s. I had nothing extensive, which got me going, got me to learn some of the rules and protocols that go with this kind of thing. But mostly I just did it by trial and error, and by doing it and failing and finally doing it and succeeding.
Oh, terrific. How did you come up with your titles, The Windfall, Downfall?
Well, Downfall is the evil corporate plot that takes place in the book. It's a corporate sabotage plot. I don't think I'm giving away too much by saying that. It just sounded like a kind of an ominous sounding thing. It involves the downfall of a large organization, or at least the intended downfall of a large corporation, and Windfall seemed to proceed logically from that. It was involves
I don't think I'm giving away too much here either, a large financial payout down the line, and an illicit one at that, and I thought that was in the nature of a windfall, and so that's how they
Cool.
link together.
Excellent. You mentioned that you chart or track your characters, and could you explain to the audience a little bit how you keep the times and the locations and the characters? I counted 18 that I could see.
Wow.
There are 18 major and minor characters and I may have missed a couple. But
Wow, I didn't know I had that many. I guess, how do I do that and keep track of all that? I would say with great difficulty.
now that I told you, it makes it more difficult.
It's not as organized a process as it sounds, I guess.
Okay.
I do start with an outline. It gives me a kind of a framework and a destination for where I'm going, but I find that I change things significantly as I go along, and my writing process is pretty unusual, I guess.
Why is that?
Well, it's a little haphazard because of my the life that I lead here with kids at home and with other demands and with continuing health concerns and so on. I do not have large uninterrupted blocks of time to do my writing. I find myself doing whatever I can, whenever I can, and that means while I'm waiting to pick up my kids at school, while I'm waiting in line somewhere, or 20 minutes here where I've waiting for something or other. It's a pretty haphazard process, and not ideal by any means, and not one that I would recommend for anybody, but that makes it pretty hard, actually, to, like you say, to keep track of what everybody's doing, and I certainly find myself doing a continual revision, and I do have an editor, fortunately, who occasionally will find some kind of continuity problem. This character had a gun in the previous scene. What happened to it? That kind of thing, just the kind of thing that you pointed out, trying to, the kind of concern, keeping track of these situations and characters.
With the idea of writing, as you say, haphazardly or in bits and pieces, are you able to, pick up, or do you have to go back and take several steps back and then?
Oh, I often have to take several steps back, fix things that are no longer consistent, that are no longer relevant to the story, and I always have to view the book as a whole, and I don't proceed necessarily in any chronological order at any given time.
Ooh, that sounds like that would be difficult.
It is difficult.
Mm-hmm. But fitting into the way that you're able to write, what your schedule and so forth allows you to write.
Right, and that's, as I said, I do what I can when I can, and sometimes it goes smoothly, and sometimes, well, we got to go back and fix some things or move some things around, and I don't think that's totally unheard of or rare for writers, but for me it's maybe a little more pronounced than it is for some authors.
Okay. What made you set Windfall in its particular places, and your other stories too? What made you select the sense of place in them?
Well, both of these books take place partly in Minnesota and partly in California. Well, I'm a Minnesotan, born and bred. I like to write with an area and subject matter that I'm familiar with. The switch or the moving around of characters, I guess, kind of geographically, just kind of grew out of the story, I guess. Penn began here in Minnesota and had a bad experience here, found it necessary to go to the West Coast to pursue her investigation of the people of the wrongdoers, ends up staying there, at least for the time being, and takes a job there as a federal prosecutor, but keeps finding herself drawn back to Minnesota again. And in fact, my third book in the series here, which should be out in 2017, takes place almost entirely in Minnesota.
Oh, interesting.
A little bit in Florida, but I think Penn eventually finds that despite the bad experience that she had here, that Minnesota is a pretty special place, and kind of finds herself drawn back here again.
Mm-hmm. Does this hold true in all your novels, that the sense of place comes out of the novel itself, or?
Yeah, I believe it does. I do have two early books that are not in the Penn Wilkinson series, called Bound to Die and Poised to Kill. There's Bound to Die, for example, takes place mostly in Washington, D.C., and in other locales that grow out of its being partly a political thriller. And there are other elements that take place in specific parts of the country. There is a militia-type compound of bad guys, of separatists, and that naturally takes place in Colorado. And in my second book, Poised to Kill, that takes place partly in California, where my character works in the aerospace industry. That's a logical place for that to occur. But he is forced to flee from his job and his place of abode there, and he winds up in Minnesota, and in fact in northern Minnesota, which is becomes a logical place for him to take refuge in the course of the book.
You described a little bit about your writing process. Can you say anything more about it? Do you write every day? You talked about it being kind of when the moment opportunity presents itself, you write.
That's correct, and it is a pretty disjointed process. Technology has really helped me to do this, because I can write on multiple devices. I can do it on my phone, my laptop, my computer here at home, and it all goes onto the same manuscript in the cloud, and I can just pick it up anywhere. And so that has increased my productivity a lot in figuring out how to do that.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of the cloud being that kind of a virtual hard drive for you to hold on to that much information.
That's a good way of describing it, right, a virtual hard drive. And so I write, there's some authors who will sit in front of their screen and they will spend all day and they will come up with one page, and it will be the perfect page. They've got it all in their head, and it all comes out, and it's ready to go, and the next day they move on to the next page. Imagine pretty much the opposite of that, and that is what I do. I just get anything I can down on the page. I don't have this perfect image in my mind that comes up right away. I get something down, and then I go back over it, and no, that isn't quite right. I need to make it more like this. And it isn't until I see something on the page that I know what I'm really looking for, and so I just work with it kind of organically, to use another term that you mentioned.
Do characters appear in the process of writing a plot that you didn't know about when you conceived the plot?
Yes. I mean, some of them are utilitarian. Okay, we need a guy in this situation to block her progress in doing this. We need a guy here who's an accomplice of the bad guy so they can make their plans. And some of them just do seem to pop up. I imagined in Windfall, you know, Penn really, she's out here in California, doesn't know a lot of people. You know, I think she has found a best friend, though. And that's when the character of her friend, Rena, began to come to me. And so I guess it happens both ways. There's some that are born out of necessity, and some just kind of flow out of the situation and out of my imagination.
Is there another book related to Windfall that's coming down the pipeline?
Yes, this will be the third book in the Penn Wilkinson series. I've got the first draft completed, and as I said, I think it'll be in 2017 that I'm aiming for its release. I don't have a title for sure yet, but I think it'll have something fall at the end of it.
Yeah.
You know, we'll tie it together with the other
Right.
two books in the series.
Right. Let's go back a little bit to your background. You mentioned that you were an attorney. What kind of, where did you go to school? What kind of education did you have as an undergraduate, for instance?
Well, I went right here to the University of Minnesota as undergrad. For law school, I went out east to Georgetown, Washington, D.C., and that's provided a good backdrop, good knowledge of the city and location for my first book, Bound to Die, which is kind of centered there. I spent a couple of years in Chicago, but I always had it in my mind to come back here to Minnesota, which I did 30 years ago plus now, and that's where I've been ever since. And first few years I practiced law, I did civil litigation, people suing each other, or usually corporations suing each other, and after a while, it was kind of fun, but after a while, I just started to question, you know, what am I really accomplishing for anybody in this process? And so, mid-career, I changed, and I went in-house at a corporation here in the Twin Cities in the travel industry, and as part of that, I went around the country. I negotiated large transactions with airports for contracts and leases and so on, and I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed seeing quite a bit of the country, and that's why I've had the urge to have at least some settings for my books that are elsewhere than in Minnesota. I like to branch out from time to time from my base here for my characters.
Oh, that's interesting because you can see the thread of, you know, Minnesota showing up in various guises. You know, some are more pronounced than others, but it's really fun to see how that unfolds in your plots.
Right. I think they're all, they seem to be drawn back here, maybe in the same way that I was all those years ago. Well, you know, one thing I think might interest you is we talk about the geographical settings of the books, but the subject matter of the books has a common thread too, and I write in a genre which some people didn't know existed, and maybe it didn't exist before. But I call it corporate thrillers. They take place inside. Every one of my books has an element of big business in it, in a big corporation, and some people have said, well, corporate thriller, that sounds like an oxymoron to me. You know, my job, I work in a corporation and it's boring, you know, but I think corporation is a great setting for books because for mysteries and thrillers, I think you've got some outsized personalities involved, some larger than life personalities of people who run these companies. You've got far-flung operations in different locales. You've got tons of money involved, and you've got a lot of greed involved, and plus a lot of ordinary people doing their jobs who get caught up in these things. And I think another thing that it ties in with that is a concept that I call briefcase and gun. That's the title of my blog that I write now. You've probably heard the saying that it comes out in songs and in other places where it's easier to make money with a briefcase than it is with a gun. Well, in corporations, the people who run those make money with briefcases. Sometimes, most of the time legally, sometimes not. But when you also get some guys with the guns involved, that's where it gets interesting, I think. You get some criminals who are outside of corporate respectability, who are outside the law, who either collaborate with or clash with the people in corporation. That's where a corporate thriller becomes real interesting, where you've got both the briefcase and the gun element, and I try to have those in all of my books.
Mm-hmm. That is very interesting, because you also have the character that can be the cog that is the weakest link, that gets what's the word I want, that can derail something.
Right. That's
they seem to be very insignificant characters, but
right. And I have a couple of characters who find myself in that situation, including Penn in my first book about her, Downfall. She's just an ordinary person doing a job in a corporation. She slowly finds out that this company and this job are not exactly what they appear to be here, and finally she concludes that she is kind of the key to this whole thing, and there's a much bigger forces involved, and it all kind of hinges on her, and because some mystery writers, thriller writers have professional sleuths or professional detectives. They're cops, they're spies, they're FBI agents. I write in the genre of an amateur sleuth, amateur detective, and so that's the kind of person who can find themselves as the hinge in a much bigger plot, and that's what Penn finds her. Now, she had no intention of becoming a sleuth at all when she got into the situation, but she found, of necessity, she had to find out what was going on.
Right.
Well, the character of Penn, if I
Yeah,
may,
please go on.
was an idea that occurred to me back in the late 90s. Actually, before I wrote my first published novel, I wrote an unpublished book version of Downfall, and I got the idea for a handicapped detective from reading a book. I just happened to be reading a book by a fellow named John Hockenberry, who is a familiar name to many people from public radio, public TV, and he's a reporter, a very respected reporter, and he's a fellow who's in a wheelchair, and he got that way as a result of a car accident. I thought just the story of his life, how he was able to pursue his profession, and just the ins and outs of being a paraplegic was a very interesting concept, and I thought that for a mystery novel it would be particularly interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, you have some unique vulnerabilities, obviously. This is not somebody who's going to go and use karate or a fist fight or to subdue a bad guy. Secondly, I think it requires the sleuth in this case to use a lot of resourcefulness to work around these limitations, and it shows the full extent of her powers and abilities. And then I found that there was really a dearth of such characters in crime fiction. There are really only a couple of handicapped detectives that that I could find. And the one that comes immediately to mind is Jeffrey Deaver's character, Lincoln Rhyme, who is a criminalist, a famous criminalist who was injured in an accident. He is so severely handicapped, he's a quadriplegic, that basically Deaver relies on other characters to be his hands and feet and to do the actual work while he is the mastermind of the investigation. And I wanted a character who was not as limited as that, who was able to get around and go out and talk to people and do things and not be reliant on other characters. And so that's how I came up with the idea of using Penn. Well, I wrote this book, as I said, back in the 90s. I didn't have much thought of getting it published at the time, and so I just kind of put it in the drawer. And then in about 2010, 2011, when I was looking to get back into publishing books again, I thought, and I wanted to do something different. I thought, well, you know, maybe the best character is one that I have on my shelf here. And so I pulled out Downfall again, and I said, you know what, this was pretty good, and it's a good character. And I think that is what most of the reviewers, critics have said about Downfall and Windfall, is that it's really the character who makes the book. She's a very appealing person. She's funny, she's kind of feisty, she's very resourceful, and that's the one constant I get out of it, is that we like Penn. And so I completely rewrote Downfall. I found a new publisher here in Twin Cities, and I'm just really thrilled to have found a character who has clicked so completely. And then you say, well, where do your other characters come from? Well, her sidekick, companion, ultimately closer than that, who comes out of the first book for her, his name is James Carter, and he is a corporate CEO. And he's kind of a cranky guy, but he's very forceful, he's very decisive. He's a corporate CEO, and he adds a whole another dimension, a set of attitudes and skills that come into the equation, and the two of them eventually developed this alliance and friendship, and so that kind of grew out of the situation that was set up in Downfall.
Okay.
Well, if I could just say something a little more about Penn.
Please do.
You know, I think another thing that appealed to me about her was the way that she overcomes adversity and deals with a handicap. You know, that's something that I think a lot of people have. They have desire to root for the underdog. They have desire to see somebody overcome the odds, and this is somebody who becomes disabled as a result of a car accident. Her becoming a paraplegic in the car accident is not the worst result of the accident. The worst result is that her young niece was killed in the accident.
Oh, heavens.
And that is a tremendous tragedy and source of guilt that really has a much stronger effect on her and much more adversity than her being confined to a wheelchair. And this is something in my third book that will come into play a little more, some more family dynamics between Penn and her sister, who is the niece's mother, and also how she comes to terms with the guilt and the tragedy of that occurrence.
Is there any things that Penn has to deal with in terms of access with her disability? How does she handle, you know, if a place has a door jam that she can't get over? What kinds of things of that nature have you?
Well, she definitely has to deal with that kind of thing. You know, she'll pull up and somebody's parked in the handicap spot. There's no place to get out. You know, or she'll get out and it's icy and snowy outside the van. How does she get out of there? And there's other headaches and just day in and day out that paraplegics have to deal with. Yeah, how do you get through doors that are big and heavy or go the wrong way? Steps are the biggest problem. How do you, and she has to deal with this all the time when she goes to interview people in the course of her investigations. She goes to somebody's house, and how do you get up there? Well, either somebody's got to pull her up, or they end up talking, in one case, in the garage or in the back patio, or she meets him in some place that is accessible, like a Starbucks or something. Yeah, it's something she has to deal with continually. In addition to all of the other, access is probably the number one problem she has, but, you know, we go through a little bit about her, just how she has to get dressed in the morning. It's a big hassle. How do you cook food? How do you do the laundry? She has these hooks that she uses, these grippers to get in and out of the dryer and the washer. It's something that just never leaves you day in and day out. But as a result of dealing with these things, she is, of necessity, has had to learn a lot of patience. And she's not naturally a patient person at all, but when you're put into a situation like this, you pretty much have to learn it. And so when she flies on a plane, she has to wait till everybody gets off, and they have to come and get her with an aisle chair, and they have to take her off, and they have to bring her wheelchair up. It's just the kind of thing you have to be patient with, and so that's another thing that she deals with.
Did you speak with anybody who was a paraplegic to make sure you were getting it right, or did you just pull this together again organically?
Both, I would say. I did, you know, a lot of research, just as a lot of reading to see how people deal with it. But I also looked up the head of the Spinal Cord Injury Association here in Minnesota, who answered a lot of my questions about the ins and outs of being a paraplegic. He showed me his van and how he gets in and out. He was just tremendously helpful, and because that was not something I had any firsthand experience with.
Okay. The other question that I was going to ask you about, you alluded to finding a publisher here in Minnesota. How did you go about finding a publisher? I know there are writers in the audience that are always interested in how do you break into this business?
Oh yes, it's a question I almost always get asked. Well, the way I originally got published back in 2002 was a method that probably most people are never going to have, and it was a pretty unique method. I won a contest. I had been writing these mysteries for several years. They were unpublished. I went at it the way people do these things. I sent letters to agents describing the book and asking if they would represent me to publishers to see if I could get it published. And even in the late 1990s, this was a very tough process. Even then, it's become even tougher now. But I was not successful in doing that. And so, anyway, when I set out in the fall of 1998 to write I decided I wanted to write a real knock-your-socks-off thriller. I just wanted a pulse-pounding, adrenaline-charged thriller. And so I put together, I thought, what should I write it about? And I thought about several different elements. Then I thought, well, we could do this, that would work. We could do that, that would work. It was only when I decided to put all of them into the same book that,
oh my goodness,
that it really came together. And so I had a tagline when I started marketing the book. It said, a missing child, a mass shooting, a rigged presidential election, and a deadly cult. And now check out chapter 2. So it begins with a bang right away with all of these elements, and I worked very hard at it, despite having a young son here at home, and I really put everything I had into it, and I couldn't interest anybody in it. I mean, even family members, you know, they're busy people. You know, this is something, an amateur thing that I've done. I'm unpublished. You know, I don't blame them, but you know, it just was a total flop, but I kept saying to myself, but I think it's good. And anyway, after being unable to interest anybody really in reading it, I finally I did the unthinkable. I quit writing. I decided.
Oh, really?
I decided to hang it up. Without some readers, I couldn't see a reason to go on. I couldn't justify the time and the energy that I was putting into it. I said, "It's dead, Jim. I'm just gonna put it away." And that was hard.
Yeah.
That was very hard. I went through serious withdrawal. And then on September 5th, 2001, just a week before the towers came down, I get a phone call, and the fellow said, "This is Scott Schmidt from Salvo Press," small press based on the West Coast. He said, I said, "Okay." And he said, "Do you remember that you entered our contest for the best mystery novel?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." I'd forgotten all about it. 4 or 5 months earlier, I had decided that I thought Bound to Die was really good, and I just wanted somebody somewhere to read it before I quit writing. So I dropped the disc in the mail, I sent it off, and then utterly forgot about it. And he said, "Well, you were entered in our contest, you won, and we want to publish you."
Oh, wow.
And it turned out later there were like 1,000 entries that year.
Wonderful.
So maybe that was the book I should have named Windfall. I kind of won the lottery doing that, and so that was quite an experience. You know, it was a small press offering, but I didn't care. Having a few readers is fine with me, and so I went out and did the best I could to market the book, and people started reading and said, "Yeah, this is pretty good." And then one day early in 2003, I get another call, Scott Schmidt, Salvo Press, and said, "Well, we just got a letter here that says you were a finalist for a Minnesota Book Award." And after picking myself up off the floor, I said, well, that's terrific. Who's my competition?" John Sanford. I said, "Okay, well, I won't have to spend a lot of time honing my acceptance speech here. He's sold a few million more books than I have, but at least maybe I'll get to meet John Sanford anyway at the award ceremony, which they had down at Fitzgerald Theater." And at that time, I was the most obscure author published by the smallest press ever to reach the finals. But it turns out I didn't get to meet John Sanford. He was on a national tour and couldn't make it for the award ceremony. But for an author like me, that was quite a thrill and some validation that maybe what I'd been doing for those years, you know, maybe it was okay after all. So that was a terrific experience. And then 2 years later, I put out my second book, Poised to Kill, which is not part of a series. It was not related to the first book at all, but it was another thriller which took place partly in California, partly in Minnesota. And it was I like it a lot. I think it might be my favorite of the 4 that I've written. It got excellent reviews, and so I was very encouraged by that. But you know, life has a way of intervening, and when my health kind of went south in later years, partly under the strain of having now a second child, 2 kids at home here, I was not able to do another book for another 10 years. And by then, Salvo Press had been sold to a big outfit from New York, which really had no interest in putting out any more books. And the market had gotten even tougher. It's just very, even though I had established myself a little bit, it was still very tough to figure out a way to get back into it. And that's when I found Conquill Press. That was founded by 2 local folks here who are mystery authors themselves. Christopher Vallon and Jennifer LeClaire founded this press, and they had everything I needed to get back into the business. They had established this small press, and they had all the resources of the editing and design and formatting, all the things that I needed, and they had the marketing connections and expertise, and they've been terrific to work with, and I was really glad to take advantage of the opportunity. And since then, they've added 2 more authors who are very well-known local names for Minnesota mystery fans. Steve Thayer and Chuck Logan are 2 names that would be familiar to many mystery and thriller authors here in Minnesota, and they're among my favorite authors. So that's been another thrill for me, is to get to know these fellows and to work with them a little bit, and it's really been a great experience to have these 5 authors working together and producing some great books, and we're all homegrown here, and we're all authors, and it's been all good the second time around.
Oh, that's terrific. Conquill Press?
Conquill Press, right.
And it's located here in the Twin Cities?
Here in the Twin Cities, in St. Paul area, right.
Oh, that's amazing. I like to hear of small presses making it.
Absolutely.
It enriches the publishing business, I think, that not everything is out of these large presses, even the individual imprints.
Absolutely. Well, I think they're filling a void, because the big presses are all pretty much contracting the number of titles that they do. They are reducing the number of books. A number of authors who have been with their New York publishers for years have found themselves without a publisher. They have looked at the economics of the business and concluded that they only are really interested in publishing a handful of big names that will sell millions of copies, and if it doesn't do that, well, they're not interested in doing it anymore. And so I think smaller presses are really filling a need with that, and I think Conquill in particular does a great job of it.
Oh, that is so good to know that there's a local press that is making it and representing its authors well.
Absolutely.
Would you like to read something? I think you said from Downfall?
Yeah, I think the opening passage from Downfall is one that might give readers a little flavor of the type of book that it is, and maybe will interest them in reading a little further. This is Downfall, my first book in the Penn Wilkinson series. Carol Hart lived alone. She had not had guests in weeks, but she'd had a visitor. She looked again at the rack containing the kitchen knives. It had been moved. In the other rooms, nothing major was out of place, but there were several small things. She could have sworn she had hung her bathroom towel differently. And the coats hanging in her closet were swept slightly to one side, the wrong side. Was she losing her mind? She looked up suddenly, scanning the small apartment. Who on earth would want to invade her living space? There wasn't much here for her. What would there be for anyone else? At least she had the view. Stuck in a strange city with a crappy apartment and a load of pain, all Carol had left to ease the turmoil was a spectacular vista from the 23rd floor overlooking downtown Atlanta and points north. Family problems, unemployment, and above all, the unrelenting anger never took a holiday. Even the revenge she'd helped take on her tormentors, so long and careful in the making, had proved to be nothing more than a cheap, dirty high, like a whiff of glue in a dingy basement. All of it had left her precisely nowhere. It had left her here. Carol walked out and sat on the cheap plastic lawn chair on her balcony, the place where she had spent so many hours, planning to take flight, to make good the escape that had so long eluded her.
As the late-night traffic below her meandered by, she stood up and stretched, feeling slightly lightheaded. She knew she should return to her job postings and nightly glass of Chablis. She sat down at her dinette table and looked at the employment ads on her laptop, but had trouble focusing on the screen. She drained the rest of her wine, then let out a little yelp when a knock sounded on her door. She got up and approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "It's me," said a familiar voice. She looked through the peephole and exhaled. Carol admitted her visitor, feeling relieved but puzzled. "Stu," she said, "I'm glad to see you." The man she knew as Stuart Merrick smiled. "I happened to be in town and thought I'd stop in and say hello." "Well, have a seat. You want some wine?" "No, thanks," said Merrick, a nondescript man in his 40s. Carol sat down across from him, now beginning to feel dizzy and sick. "How's life, Carol?" She looked around. "What can I say? It sucks, in pretty much every way. Oh, and I want to ask you, because you know about security type things, right? To top it all off, somebody's been through this place. Without your knowledge or permission?" She nodded. "Anything missing?" She gave a short laugh. "What do I have that's worth taking?" "Who would want to break in?" "I don't know, some crank or sicko, I suppose. Somebody with a key, a maintenance guy or something. Or somebody skilled at security type things." He smiled. Carol's relief at seeing Merrick was turning to unease. "Right," she forced a smile and then turned serious. "You don't suppose this would have something to do with our project, do you? We messed with those people pretty badly." "We did, it's true." Merrick thought about it. "It's hard to say. You feel violated?" "Damn right I do. Just like those executives in Chicago did when we broke into their offices." She shifted in her chair. "Why are you here, Stu?" He didn't respond. He watched her calmly. On impulse, she asked, "Is Merrick your real name?" "As a matter of fact, no. It's actually SWAT. You're not looking well, Carol." "I don't feel well. Who are you?" He continued to watch her as her unease changed to horror. He stood up. "I think you know who I am." What do you mean? I mean, what business do you..." He waved off her objection. "Carol, it's time." "Time for what?" "Everything has a price. When you got your revenge, did it feel good?" Exasperated, she began to get up, but once again felt too dizzy to stand. "What do you want, Stu?" she asked quietly. Merrick shook his head sadly. He'd never taken his eyes off her. "Chicago project was a good one. Worthy endeavor. You did well, Carol. Dick and Terry, too." She took deep breaths, her mind racing. Merrick said, "You'd think people would know when their time comes, but they never seem to." What on earth do you mean?" "Denial is natural, understandable, but it never changes reality. Never." Panic gripped her. "Look, whatever problem you've got, let's talk about it." Her head swam. She forced herself to her feet, staggered, braced herself against the table. Then she understood. "The wine," she said. Merrick nodded. "You're a creature of habit. Some wine every night. I added a little something to it. That was the main reason for my visit yesterday. It's nothing that'll show up in the tox report, though." "The tox? Oh, God, no," she said. "We can work this out, Stu. Just tell me what I can do. We can talk about it. I've given you a gift, Carol. You see, when I've made my decision about someone, I give them a choice. Those who cooperate are allowed a peaceful and painless end. Those who resist suffer the consequences. In your case, the wine has reduced your power to resist." Carol thought about trying to bolt for the door. She knew that theoretically she could still make the choice to resist to the best of her ability. But she was long past that point, long beyond hope. And then it hit her. "Oh God, Terry and Dick, You're going to, he nodded. Then he walked over, reached out, caressed her face. Please, my God. She tried to stagger toward the door, but her knees buckled. And now that she had found the desire to resist, she no longer had the ability. He caught her and swept her up into his arms, carrying her out to the balcony. What was Chicago all about? She asked. Why did we do it? Who was behind it? Not much point in explaining the plan now, he said, but I can tell you its name, and it's an appropriate one for the moment. Merrick smiled. It's called Downfall. With that, he lifted her over the railing and deposited her into space.
Wow. That is amazing.
Well, I try to start off with a bang, encourage the readers to read on, and set up some big unanswered questions and set up some action, and I try to start all my books with something just about like that.
Oh, fantastic. Brian Lutterman, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that if I've missed?
Well, I'd just like to put in a plug for reading, Sue Ellen. You know, it's becoming kind of a lost art in this electronic age, but I think with our kids, in our adult lives when we're so busy, it's so important to promote literacy, to promote reading of all types, not just mysteries and thrillers, but reading in general. I really, I guess if you're watching this show, you're a reader already, and I really encourage you to share the wealth and to pass that around. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for joining us. And thank you for joining us at BookBeat today. We look forward to seeing you next time.